La historia nunca fue contada así.
In February 1927, this extraordinary photograph brought together some of the most influential figures in the United States during a conference about the future of the Smithsonian Institution. Most striking is that the same image features a sitting president, Calvin Coolidge, a former president, William Howard Taft, and Herbert Hoover, who would become president months later. Unwittingly, the camera immortalized a unique moment where the past, present, and future of American leadership converged in a single room to discuss the direction of one of the nation's most important scientific institutions. At the beginning of the 20th century, this enormous diving suit looked like something out of a science fiction novel. Designed in 1907, it incorporated an advanced electrical recharging system and protection against dangerous overpressure, allowing divers to work at greater depths with greater safety. His metallic and robust appearance earned him the nickname Iron Man, decades before the famous superhero existed. For the time, it represented one of the greatest technological advances in the exploration of the underwater world. This photograph from the 1940s captures a fascinating contrast between strict military discipline and the spontaneity of childhood. While a cavalry officer maintains impeccable posture during an exercise, a child in the foreground seems determined to become the true protagonist of the image. That small gesture breaks the solemnity of the scene and gives it an unexpectedly human touch. It's a reminder that even in times of military training, there was always room for scenes that no one planned. Before flying became a mass phenomenon, airplanes offered a level of comfort that seems hard to believe today. This image shows the upper deck of a Qantas Boeing 747 in 1971, furnished with spacious armchairs and an elegant lounge designed for socializing during the flight. More than just a flight, the experience resembled an exclusive club in the sky. It was a time when luxury was part of the allure of air travel. This curious photograph from 1980 shows Mia Farrow and Woody Allen walking in front of a huge poster where Mia herself appears alongside Tony Perkins. The scene creates a striking interplay between real life and cinema, as if the actress crossed paths with a version of herself from the past. Over time, the image would take on even more striking meaning due to the enormous impact that the relationship between Farrow and Allen would have. It is one of those photographs that seems simple, but whose story changes completely over the years. This striking photograph shows General Dwight D. Eisenhower walking next to a German Tiger tank destroyed after the Battle of Chambord, France in 1944. The scene symbolizes the collapse of one of the most feared weapons of the German army during World War II. A few years later, Eisenhower would go from leading the Allied victory in Europe to becoming President of the United States, an image that captures the end of a battle and the beginning of a new era. This 1981 photograph depicts an everyday scene in the midst of the conflict known as the Troubles in Northern Ireland. While three young people walk with apparent calm, two British soldiers remain on alert, watching for possible snipers after a wave of riots in Belfast. The contrast between the girls' normality and the military tension reflects how thousands of people tried to continue with their lives surrounded by the conflict, an image that summarizes the delicate balance between routine and constant danger. This powerful image shows German soldiers parading victoriously in front of the French World War I monument in Verdun after the fall of France in 1940. The site was one of the greatest symbols of the French resistance, as one of the bloodiest battles of the First World War was fought there. Seeing the German troops marching in front of that monument was a psychological blow as strong as the military defeat itself. A photograph that reflects how history can change dramatically in just a few decades. This photograph shows German Wehrmacht soldiers walking the streets of Oslo during the early days of the 1940 invasion of Norway, known as Operation Weserübung. As the truck moves forward loaded with troops and military equipment, the inhabitants silently observe the beginning of an occupation that would change their lives for 5 long years. The scene reflects the uncertainty of a population that witnesses in real time how the war reaches the doors of its city. An image that captures the moment when history changed for an entire nation. This incredible photograph shows Canadian soldiers marching past Stonehenge in 1914, shortly after the start of the First World War. The contrast between the ancient monument, with thousands of years of history, and the troops heading to the front creates an unforgettable scene. Many of those young people continued their path towards some of the bloodiest combats of the conflict. An image where the most remote past and one of the most decisive moments of the 20th century intersect in the same moment. This shocking photograph shows pedestrians walking past an anti-Semitic poster erected in front of the Vienna State Opera in 1938, shortly after the annexation of Austria by Nazi Germany. What is most disturbing is the apparent nonchalance with which people continue on their way, while hate speech becomes part of the everyday landscape. The image reflects how discrimination was normalized before giving way to one of the greatest tragedies in history. A reminder that great events often begin with small acts that many choose to ignore.
This 1979 photograph captures a father walking with his children through the streets of Belfast as soldiers patrol the area amid riots. The scene reflects how, during the conflict in Northern Ireland, the military presence was a part of daily life for thousands of families. Despite the tension and danger, people tried to carry on with their daily routines. It's an image that demonstrates how life went on, even in the most difficult times.
This charming photograph from the 1920s shows a young couple driving along the road next to the towering rock formation known as Balanced Rock in Garden of the Gods, Colorado. The scene conveys the spirit of adventure of a time when road trips were beginning to gain popularity. Surrounded by a spectacular landscape, they enjoyed an experience that for many was a true luxury. An image that captures the freedom and optimism of the early years of the automobile era. This extraordinary photograph from 1918 brings together 2 men who years later would shape the destiny of Europe during World War II. It shows Winston Churchill, then Minister of Armaments, observing a military parade in Lille, while in front of him is a still unknown Lieutenant Colonel, Bernard Montgomery. No one could have imagined that both would become 2 of the main leaders of the Allied victory decades later. A photograph that captured the beginning of a story that would change the world. This photograph from the late 1930s shows 2 workers putting up a sign promoting the benefits of joining a union in Detroit, one of America's major industrial cities. In those years, disputes between companies and unions defined the future of millions of workers. The huge announcement sought to convince the population that collective organization could guarantee better wages and working conditions, an image that reflects a time when work was also a battlefield for social rights. This famous photograph was taken on January 8, 1959, during one of Fidel Castro's first speeches after the triumph of the Cuban Revolution. In the middle of the speech, a dove landed on his shoulder while others flew over the stage, a fact that many interpreted as a symbolic or even divine sign. As the years passed, the scene gave rise to countless theories, debates, and stories that reinforced the aura surrounding the new leader, an image that went from being a simple coincidence to becoming one of the most iconic moments in Cuban history. This striking photograph, taken in Johannesburg around 1956, shows two African men walking past a sign symbolizing the harsh reality of apartheid in South Africa. During that regime, racial segregation laws controlled where people could live, work, and even travel based on the color of their skin. The most shocking thing about the image is how a simple sign represented a system of discrimination imposed by the state. An everyday scene that today recalls one of the darkest chapters in South African history. This fascinating 1949 photograph captures a unique moment where two eras of transportation seem to intersect. As an American Airlines DC-3 flies overhead, a horse-drawn stagecoach rolls peacefully along the road. The image symbolizes the breathtaking technological leap that took place in just a few decades, from the Old West to the age of commercial aviation. A reminder of how quickly the world can change in a single generation. This historic photograph from March 1945 shows Winston Churchill and Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery being driven in a military vehicle past Allied troops deployed along the banks of the Rhine. The scene takes place in the final months of World War II, when the Allied advance was pressing directly into the heart of Germany. The atmosphere reflects a mixture of celebration, tension, and determination after years of fighting. An image that captures the moment when victory in Europe was becoming inevitable. This image from 1888 is part of the work of photographer Eugene Atget, who dedicated his life to documenting old Paris before it disappeared with modernization. In this scene, you can see an unusual building that belonged to the former medical school of the University of Paris, captured in an almost unrepeatable moment of calm. Although there is human activity on the street corners, the composition conveys a sense of silence and frozen time. A photograph that not only shows a place, but also the memory of a city that was about to be transformed forever. This 1937 photograph shows Buzz Holmstrom after completing an extraordinary feat, paddling solo from the Green River in Wyoming, across the confluence with the Colorado River, and down the Grand Canyon. Their journey continued for days, braving unpredictable currents and stunning scenery until they reached the rising waters of Lake Mead. Finally, he finished his journey by crossing the Boulder Dam area, a work that represented the power of modern engineering. It's the story of a man facing one of the most extreme natural environments in the United States, completely alone. This iconic 1936 image shows the Hindenburg airship gliding silently through the New York City sky as it passes the towering Empire State Building. The scene reflects the golden age of airships, when they were believed to dominate future air travel. The contrast between the enormous floating airship and the city's skyscrapers symbolizes the technological advancement of the time. Few knew that this type of flight would soon mark the end of an era. This photograph from May 1913 captures a moment of transition between two very different worlds. A primitive biplane crosses the sky while three British soldiers on horseback watch from the field with apparent calm. The scene captures the clash between cavalry-based military tradition and the birth of aerial warfare. It is an image that, unbeknownst to them at the time, foreshadowed how the First World War would forever change the way wars were fought. This photograph from April 1968 shows three young people walking in front of a shop window where the portrait of Martin Luther King Jr. is displayed. The image was taken a few days after his assassination, at a time of deep shock throughout the country. As the city continues its normal rhythm, the leader's face appears on the glass as a symbol of his recent loss and his enormous legacy. It is a scene that mixes everyday life with the beginning of a period of mourning and historical change.
This photograph from October 1962 shows two men driving past an anti-aircraft rocket launcher deployed on the beach near Key West, Florida, in the midst of the Cuban Missile Crisis. At that time, the United States was experiencing one of the most tense periods of the Cold War, with real fear of a nuclear conflict. The contrast between everyday life and the presence of heavy military weaponry reflects how close the world came to an unprecedented escalation. An image that captures the anxiety of a time where any movement could change history.
This photograph from November 1961 captures a vibrant scene of daily life in Kabul, Afghanistan, where men stroll leisurely past street vendors along the roadside. Amidst the constant movement of the street, a truck decorated with traditional paintings slowly makes its way along, highlighting the color and cultural identity of the place. The image reflects a bustling city where commerce, transportation, and social life blend seamlessly into one space. It's a snapshot that captures the energy and urban rhythm of Kabul at that time. This scene from November 1995 shows customers in Tokyo watching in awe as the Japanese version of Windows 95 launches just after midnight in the famous Akihabara Technology District. The atmosphere reflects the enormous expectation generated by this operating system, which had already revolutionized the market in its English version months before. People crowded into the store as if it were a historic event, aware that computing was entering a new era. An image that captures the exact moment when technology began to become a central part of everyday life. This moving photograph from April 1945 shows Chief Warrant Officer Graham Jackson performing "Going Home" as the body of President Franklin D. Roosevelt is transported after his death in Warm Springs, Georgia. The scene occurred in the place where Roosevelt used to rest and where he even planned to attend a barbecue on the day of his death. The contrast between the solemn music and the pain of the moment made the image one of the most moving symbols of the end of World War II. A photograph that reflects the emotional impact of the loss of a leader in the midst of world history. This striking photograph from 1924 shows a house being moved through the streets of Washington, D.C., passing just in front of the south lawn of the White House. At that time, moving entire buildings was a real solution when structures needed to be relocated without demolishing them. The scene draws attention because of the unusual moment, with an entire house slowly moving through the city as if it were just another vehicle. An image that reflects an era where urban engineering solved problems in a way that was both practical and unexpected. This 1959 photograph shows young Soviet people walking in front of the imposing Moscow State University building, located on the Lenin Hills. The scene reflects the pride of the Soviet Union in its great post-war architectural projects, symbols of the power and progress of the state. As students pass by, the massive skyscraper dominates the skyline as a statement of educational and political ambition. An image that captures the contrast between the daily life of youth and the monumentality of the Soviet project of the time. This 1976 photograph shows Illinois State Senator David C. Shapiro parading in a vehicle during the Fiesta Parade in Rock Falls. In the scene, he passes in front of the curious Jesus Coffee House, a place that reflects the community and cultural atmosphere of the event. The parade mixes local politics, popular celebration, and everyday elements of the city in the same moment, an image that captures the festive spirit of the season in a small American community. This photograph, from around 1950, shows Soviet children marching in formation in front of the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. The scene reflects the climate of ideological tension typical of the early years of the Cold War, where even public events could have strong political symbolism. The discipline of the march contrasts with the diplomatic presence of the American building, turning what might otherwise have been a military fashion into a window onto a world at war. This June 1944 photograph shows a man driving past the ruins of the ancient Temple of Venus in Rome, shortly after the city's liberation during World War II. The scene mixes classic history with one of the most decisive moments of the modern conflict, where the Allied advance began to change the course of the war in Italy. The contrast between the ruins of the Roman Empire and the contemporary military presence is striking. An image that unites two historical falls, separated by centuries, but connected in the same place.
This December 1972 photograph shows astronaut Eugene Cernan walking on the lunar surface during the Apollo 17 mission, the last of the Apollo program to reach the moon. In the scene, he advances next to the Van Surg crater, a completely desolate and silent landscape that contrasts with any terrestrial environment. Each step represents the closing of an era of historical exploration for humanity, an image that captures the moment when humans left their last footprint on the moon during the 20th century.
This 1898 photograph shows Emperor Wilhelm II with his wife Augusta Victoria of Schleswig-Holstein leading a royal motorcade in the rain in Jerusalem, within the then Ottoman Empire. Both advance in front of the Lutheran Church of the Redeemer, a temple that they had traveled to inaugurate as part of a diplomatic visit of great importance. The scene reflects the political and religious weight of the European presence in the Holy Land at that time, an image that captures a solemn moment where power, faith, and history intersect in the same place. This 1916 photograph shows French soldiers marching in front of the Petit Palais in Paris during the First World War. The scene reflects the determination of a country that, despite the devastating conflict on the front, maintained life and military discipline in its capital. The imposing building of the Petit Palais serves as the backdrop for a march that symbolizes resistance and continuity in times of war. An image that captures the mix between the cultural greatness of Paris and the sacrifice of a nation in combat. This photograph compares two naval eras at the same moment in front of Portsmouth Harbor. In the foreground is the historic HMS Victory, a symbol of Nelson's era and the Napoleonic Wars at the beginning of the 19th century. Passing by is the modern HMS Dreadnought, launched in 1906 and considered the beginning of a new era in naval warfare. The contrast between both ships shows how military technology had evolved drastically in a century, an image that unites past and present in a single scene over the sea.
This 1945 photograph shows Norma Jean in the years when she was not yet known as Marilyn Monroe, long before she became a global film icon. At that time, she was leading a completely different life, working as a model while dreaming of breaking into Hollywood. The image captures a transitional stage in which his identity was still taking shape. Shortly thereafter, she would change her name and Marilyn Monroe's rise to global fame would begin.
This 1916 photograph shows two little brothers in Charlottesville, captured in an everyday moment of childhood at the beginning of the 20th century. Their looks and posture convey the simplicity of a time when family life revolved around the essentials. The image retains an air of tenderness and nostalgia, typical of portraits of that era. A moment frozen in time that reflects how even the simplest scenes can become historic over the years.
This photograph perfectly summarizes the essence of the 80s, a time marked by portable technology and arcade culture. In it, you can see a man listening to his Walkman while playing Pac-Man, combining two of the biggest icons of daily life at that time. The scene reflects how music and video games began to be part of everyday life in an individual and portable way, an image that captures the spirit of a generation that lived technological innovation with total enthusiasm.